It is a very chilly but gorgeous winter day outside in January today. And for a lot of gardeners, January is kind of a time off period. It's a period to plan your garden, to take insights, to think about what we want to do in the future. But there is something, if you are itching to do something for your garden, that you can do right now in the middle of winter, and it's super productive and it's a lot of fun. And it's called winter sowing. And that's what I'm here to talk to you today about. If you have questions through this presentation, please feel free to ask. We will be fielding questions through our Facebook Live event. And I will be also answering questions afterwards on the Facebook feed. So if you get to the end of the video and you have some questions that you feel weren't answered, please feel free to leave some comments below and I will be getting back to you. So let's get started today. The first thing we do before we talk about answering questions about it is, what is winter sowing? I want to talk a little bit about winter sowing, why it's beneficial, and how we should go about doing it. So winter sowing is a process by which we prepare and place outside our seeds in the middle of winter. Which kind of seems counterproductive, because a lot of times you're starting these beautiful little seedlings a little bit later in the year, more like March-ish for most of our seedlings, or sometimes April, and you're just desperately protecting them and you're keeping them nice and cozy and warm. And so putting them outside in 0-degree weather in Minnesota seems a little counterproductive. But actually, for a lot of perennial seed, for a lot of native seed, and for cold weather garden seed, vernalization, that is the process that a seed goes through when it is subjected to winter temperatures and a cold rest period before it springs up in the spring, is really, really important for proper seed germination. That is the process by which the seed wakes up. So a lot of times you may have purchased some perennial seed, like some of the stuff that we have over here in our displayer, and you go to put it in the garden or you go to start it inside, and maybe you get 1 or 2 seedlings and you're just not getting the kind of germination rates, the awake seedling response that you want out of your seed. And you're like, well, what am I doing wrong? I've got this beautiful delphinium packet. It should work. I know the plant is hardy to Minnesota. I put it in my little seedling tray in my sunny window and I get nothing. Or I put it out in the garden in May and nothing happens. That whole little soil plot is absolutely blank. There's no seeds coming up and I can't figure out what I've done wrong. And the fact of the matter is that you probably haven't done something wrong. It's just the wrong time of year for that seed to be planted. So for all of our perennials, for almost every single Minnesota native plant, they have to go through a cold period in order to actually wake that seed up and have it be successful in the springtime. So what we're doing with winter sowing is we're giving that seed a chance to freeze, to get really cold, and then to wake up successfully in the springtime. A lot of folks will do some seed planting for their perennial seed in the autumn, and if you forgot, there's still a chance to get your seed out and get it growing for the spring with winter sowing. So let's take our first question.
Our first question is, are there better seeds than others to start this with?
Yes. So are there some seeds that are better to start via winter sowing than others? And so the very first thing that you want to think about when you're choosing seeds to use for winter sowing, like I've done over here, is think about what kind of plant is it? Is it a Minnesota perennial? So is it a plant that comes back year after year in Minnesota? That would make it a cold hardy plant, and the vast majority of those plants are probably dropping their seed in the autumn. That seed goes into the soil surface, it rests and is subjected to freezing cold temperatures through the entire winter, and in the spring when the soil begins to warm, that seed begins to wake up and it makes a little baby plant. So that's the kind of seed that we're actually looking for. You can also use biannual seed. That's things like foxgloves, hollyhocks, Canterbury bells, bells of Ireland, plants that will grow the first year and bloom the second, and they may hang around for 2 to 3 years and then die again. So biennials are an excellent candidate for winter sowing. You also have some edible options with winter sowing. You can do things that like cold weather, such as snow peas, lettuce, radishes, beets. All of those are really, really excellent candidates for winter sowing because they love cold weather and they're going to adapt really well to those early spring temperatures, and they're going to wake right up and you're going to have veggies really super early, which is fantastic. And also I've included one little alpine strawberry here. Now that's a seed that you may not necessarily think of as being cold hardy because you don't get the strawberries until June, but actually alpine strawberries do fantastically winter sown. They germinate at very, very high success rates. They love cold weather, and they're going to make little baby plants for you really, really well.
So if someone wanted to plant the edible ones, what would you give for a timeline on that?
So with edibles, basically what you can do if you wanted to, let's say, plant some snow peas for early snow pea production, what you would do is you go ahead and plant them now, and you don't have to do all of that prep work that you normally would do with a snow pea because that hard shell can be so difficult to make germinate. Usually we're soaking the peas, we're putting them between layers of paper toweling, we're trying to abrade the seed coat, something to get the seed to break open and actually make a snow pea. When you do winter sowing, Mother Nature does that entire process for you. So you put the pea in your soil, you're going to put it out in the cold, you're going to let Mother Nature take care of it for the next 2 months or so, and then come March, when the temperatures begin to rise, you'll see a little baby snow pea plant coming out of your seedling, and then within the next month you'll be ready to harvest snow peas because they go really, really fast. So if there's pollinators in the air in April, you'll probably have snow peas quicker than you would even putting them directly in the garden.
And with these ideal seed types, is there an ideal seed or soil type?
Yeah, so when you're working with any kind of seedling, you want to use something like our seedling mix. This is a propagation mix. We have several different kinds of propagation mixes here at Gertens, and the benefit of using propagation mixes when we're working with seeds is that it provides the ideal conditions that seedlings really like when they are first basically hatching, germinating. And so this is a seedling mix that's very light. It does retain good amounts of moisture so the seedlings don't dry out, and it's very well draining so that they don't get swampy and they get killed by too much moisture. So we have several different seedling mixes. The thing that you want to think about when you're doing winter sowing versus indoor work is that don't buy a product that already has mycorrhizae in it. Now, normally everyone who watches my videos knows I'm a huge proponent of mycorrhizae. It's a fantastic product, and it's really, really good for seedlings because it bonds to those baby roots and it gets them started. However, because you are placing it out in 0 degree / maybe even -20 degree weather this February, perhaps, we may see a return of that Arctic temperature. The mycorrhizae spores in the soil will freeze and die. So there's no real point to adding mycorrhizae at the beginning of the process with your winter sowing. The time to do that is actually when you transplant your baby plants into the garden. So at that point you can apply your mycorrhizae product and then plant your plant into the garden when the temperatures are already warm and those spores can be active, they can be growing and bonding with your plants. So that's the only thing to watch out for when you're choosing a propagation mix for winter sowing.
And then also for the prep work, what would you recommend for a container?
So let's talk containers for a second. A lot of folks who have done winter sowing in the past probably are wondering why there is no milk jug on my table. Karen, where's the milk jug? The milk jug is eponymous with winter sowing. And the reason that I don't personally do milk jugs versus pots, which is what I'm going to be doing winter sowing with today, is that there are a few problems with milk jugs. They do make great little mini greenhouses, don't get me wrong, that part is wonderful. You do have to drill your drainage holes, so don't forget about that if you're choosing to do milk jugs, but there are some problems with milk jugs too. First of all, very, very difficult to properly sterilize. And we do need a fairly sterile environment when we're growing seedlings because they can pick up, like most babies, diseases. They're much more susceptible to things that can kill them from fungal and bacterial diseases. So pre-used food containers can be difficult to sterilize properly. If you were to, say, put your milk jug in the dishwasher and hit the sterile setting on your dishwasher, you're going to end up with a melted milk jug. So that is less than ideal. What we really want is we want a surface where we can sterilize it properly, and at the end of this process, when we go to plant our plants in the garden, we want to be able to successfully transplant our baby seedlings without causing harm to the roots. And this is a problem when we get to a milk jug or any other kind of tray setup, because when you're working with a tray full of little baby seedlings and you go to split them or separate them and put them in the ground, you have basically, you're tearing roots apart, right? because you have to get the little seedlings separated from the other little seedlings in order to get them in the garden. And so you've got ripping and tearing of all of those precious little root surfaces, and it is going to be really, really hard for those little baby plants. And a lot of times that's what folks find difficulty with, is that transplant from inside the milk jug either to a bigger pot or into the garden itself. So we want to try to minimize as much root stress as we can and go with a different kind of container.
I think that we can probably recognize that something came on.
Yes.
Oh, look at that.
Yes, so we're raising our shades here in the greenhouse. If anyone was wondering what that mechanical sound was, that was our shades being open to allow more light to our plants here. Life in the greenhouse, live, Facebook Live, everybody. What's our next question?
So now that we have our seeds and our container and soil picked out, once we have everything in, do we still need to water the seeds?
Yes. So let's talk about the process of how we go about actually doing our winter sowing. For those of you who, you have a couple different seed options. You can purchase seed, like some of these gorgeous seed packets that I have here. And when you're doing that, make sure that you're choosing seed packets that either say perennial or they say something about sow as soon as the soil is workable, or sow in the autumn. You want seed that's going to be cold tolerant and like that cold weather and need that cold weather for vernalization. So this is some good options right here. And for those of you who are super plant savvy or who have really nice friends, maybe you have some collected seed at home. And I have some collected seed that I brought from home. This is milkweed seed. This was given to me from by a friend here at work, because we're all plant friends here. We all love plants. So this is native Minnesota milkweed seed here, and you can see I've separated all the fuzzy off of it. That allows the milkweed seed to kind of float on the breeze and find good soil to land in the autumn. And there's a hint, right? The seed is being released from the plant in the autumn, which means that it needs to stay in the soil during the cold weather in the winter in order to actually successfully wake up. So anytime you have a plant that is making seed for you here in Minnesota in the autumn, and it's a perennial or it's a biannual or it's a native, you are going to need some vernalization. You're going to need some cold. So I've got these little milkweed seeds here, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by selecting my container. Now, a lot of folks are like, Karen, I want to recycle, right? Some of the reason that we like to use things like food containers and milk jug containers is we want to be environmentally sustainable. Well, this is a little houseplant cup that I got with one of my houseplants last winter, and now I'm going to be recycling it, and I'm going to be using it for my winter sowing this spring. So I've gone ahead and I washed it. I put a little bit of hydrogen peroxide in it to make sure it didn't have any germs inside, and now I'm going to reuse it in my winter sowing. It's a great little container. It's nice and deep. It's got good soil depth here. I've got probably 3 inches of soil depth in this little cup. And it's going to be super easy for me to pull these milkweed seedlings out and transplant them in my garden this spring. So now I'm going to take my little milkweed seeds, and I'm just going to put a couple in. I don't want to go crazy, and hopefully Terry can get this on camera here. I'm going to probably do 3. That gives me a good rate of success. I should probably have at least one really nice plant come out of this, and then before I put it in the ground, I'm going to go ahead and thin. And to thin means to pluck out the seedlings that are less successful so that the most successful seedling can have the rule of the roost and can get big and tough and just grow healthy and gorgeous. So that's what we want. We don't want to go crazy with the amount of seeds we're putting in. And I'm just going to poke the little seeds into the soil here. I'm just going to poke. I'm going to poke this one down. I'm going to poke this one down. Okay, so it doesn't need to go down very far. That's maybe, half of an inch. I'm going to cover it back up with my seedling propagation mix here. Tap, tap, tap. Okay, so that's step 1. So then what I would do is I'm going to go ahead. I don't have water in this, but I would water. You want to make sure that when you are watering for winter sowing that you apply your water. It's going to need to come out the bottom of the cup. So make sure if you're using pots or if you're using a container, you have holes drilled in the bottom to allow for drainage. You have to have drainage or you'll kill your seedlings through drowning them. And then number 2, you want the soil to be evenly moist. Think of a sponge after you've dipped it in the water and wrung it out. So it needs to be moist but not sopping wet. And then I'm going to put I'm going to take one of these. So this is another must-have. Anytime you're doing any kind of seed sowing, make sure you are getting labels. Why labels? Because every little cup of seed looks like every other little cup of seed, and even us plant experts, when we're looking at seedlings, we're like, I think that was that poppy, but maybe it was this thing instead. So in order to make sure that I know what I'm growing, I am going to take a Sharpie, and we have some really nice Sharpies for seed. These are Sharpie Extreme, and they hold up really, really well to weathering and cold and snow and all sorts of poor and hard conditions. So we're going to use these Extreme Sharpies. I'm going to write right on my little plant tag, this is milkweed. And this particular kind of milkweed is showy milkweed. And if I really want to get super fancy, on the back, maybe I put the scientific name. And I might spell it wrong, but that's okay. So we've got one side with our generic common name. We've got the other side with our scientific name, so we know what we're growing. We're going to put that little tag right in our pot, and then we're going to put our pot in our tray. Okay? So, and then you rinse and repeat for however many times you want to fill up your tray. It's very important that you only put one kind of seed in each pot or in each container. You do not want to mix and match seed. Number one, because again, you're pulling roots out from each other and you're going to hurt your little seedlings because you're trying to keep the Canterbury bells separate from the hollyhocks. Number two, they each deserve their own growing space, right? So to have successful seedlings that are big enough and happy enough to go into the garden, they each need their own soil space in order to be as big and as happy and as healthy as they can be before they go into the garden. So by limiting myself to only putting a couple of seeds in each pot, by thinning the seedlings in the spring when they start to come up, so I only have the healthiest ones that I'm working with, and then by only choosing one type of seed to put in each pot, I am making sure that I can be as successful as possible come May when it's time to get these little beauties into the ground. So that's our first couple of steps. And this, because it is winter sowing, we're going to do something a little bit extra. So in order to be successful with winter sowing, we have to create a greenhouse type environment. And for those folks who have been working with milk jugs, that is what the milk jug is doing for you, that just a regular open pot is not, is it's creating a greenhouse environment. It's helping to create a warmer environment inside where your seedlings will grow, so that when stuff starts to warm up in March, the inside of this container is going to be way warmer than the outside air, right? Just like if I'm in here in the greenhouse, inside the greenhouse is going to be way warmer than outside. So we're using this plastic dome as a greenhouse, and the reason I really love these versus other like food containers and things is I have control over this environment. These are meant specifically to give gardeners control over how much humidity, how much water, how much airflow, and heat you're allowing in here simply by applying these little semicircles. And what you do is you pop that guy in there, and then depending on how much airflow, how much water you want in there, you can slide it open and closed. If you've got a really warm day, you're sliding it all the way open, and you can do that on the sides here as well. And if you have a colder day, you just slide them closed again so that you're protecting your little seedlings, you're trapping your heat. Make sure as the weather warms, you're going to check for re-watering again. So as we get warmer temperatures in March, we're going to go out, we're going to check and see how our little seedlings are doing, and then we're going to water again. Make sure that you're getting the water out of your tray.
What would qualify as a warmer day?
A warmer day, it's probably going to be anything that is in the high 40s to 50s because, and it's going to depend a little bit on where you site your stuff too. So the more sun this little greenhouse gets, the hotter it's going to get, the faster. And that's not exactly ideal for young seedlings. So you actually want to place this when you put this outside, which is your final step in your winter sowing process, is to take this and put it outside so it can be subjected to all the cold and the snow and the wind and all those things. We need those winter conditions to vernalize our native seedlings and all of our cold hardy seedlings. We're going to put it not in direct sun. And the reason for that is when the temperatures begin to go into the 50s and into the 60s, essentially what you've created is now you've got 80 to 90 degree temperatures under this thing. And that is not what we want. We want the temperatures to be warm, but not hot. We want the environment to be moist, but not so humid that it's causing fungal diseases. So we're going to place it either on the east side of our house, out of direct sun. We can have maybe a couple hours of sun in the morning and that's it. Or we can even put it on the north side of the house. So here is a use for your shady parts of your yard that you never get to use in gardening ever because it's just way too dark. Put your winter sowing containers in your shady parts of your garden, and they will be subjected to all the winter weather stuff, all of the cold, all of the snow, all the things that they need to be successful, but you won't overheat your container with the direct sun that you would be getting from the south and west sides of your home.
And then for containers like this, does this also protect from animals or other things?
Yes. So with young seedlings, that is something that, say, our little rabbit friends, field mice, things like that, are going to find particularly scrumptious looking in March when there is nothing else growing yet. So by using something like this, it's a little bit bigger. Number one, our bunny friends are not going to be able to get in there. You may have some chewing activity. If you notice nomming, if you notice little bite marks, you can coat that with a little bit of cayenne pepper, and that will stop that in its tracks because they do not like the taste of hot things. So you can just get a little oil and cayenne pepper, and you just use a little brush to just brush it on like you're brushing on oil on a steak. And that will stop any chewing behavior. You can tape this actually down to keep animals from messing with them. So this is a really good, safe way to grow your little seedlings outside and to prevent them from getting eaten and killed before you get a chance to get them into your garden.
And then do seedlings need to be hardened off like our other indoor stuff?
Yeah, so when I'm growing, let's say, zinnias inside, in my windowsill with lights on them, those little baby plants have to get used to the colder conditions in my garden before I can put them outside. The wonderful thing about winter sowing is that you don't have to harden off because they're already used to the cold weather, and you're going to get very, very few instances of fungal diseases and issues like damping off. Because they are getting cold weather, they're getting airflow, they're getting natural rainfall, all the things that seeds are getting out in the yard this time of year and in the spring, they're already acclimated to our garden conditions because they've been living in the garden since January. So you don't have to do any of that take it out, bring it in, take it out, bring it in dance that you're doing in March and April with your seedlings to try and get them ready to go in the garden. These guys are already ready. So when they get big and you see the little roots coming out, they can go right into your garden. They're ready to go.
Perfect. And then, so if someone does this process and has multiple seed types in the container, are they all going to grow at the same time, or is each seed a little different?
So just like with people and plants are going to grow at different rates. So if I were to do my milkweed and then I was to grab some poppy and maybe some violas and some lettuce, I'm going to expect each plant is going to come up at a different time and each plant is going to grow at a different rate. So my poppies and my lettuce are probably going to grow pretty quickly because they want to get stuff done in a hurry. Their job is to either grow and bloom that same year or to grow and in the case of our lettuce get eaten right away. So they are growing at very, very rapid growth rates even in a winter sowing condition where they're in cooler weather. With something like the milkweed, or let's say if we're doing some bergamot, which is bee balm, for those folks who are like, what's bergamot, Karen? It's actually the herbal name for species bee balm. Those guys, their job is to grow big and strong for a couple of years before they start to reproduce, before they give us flowers. So rates on your perennial seeds are going to be much slower. They're going to take longer to germinate. We're going to see little seedlings later in the season, and they're not going to grow as fast as something like lettuce or poppy seed will grow because that's not their job. Their job is to grow strong and to take their time that they need to take to get big and healthy over a couple of years. So it's really important to remember if you wanted to plant delphinium seed this winter, you probably will not see delphinium flowers for 2 to 3 years.
And do you have any final points you want to touch on?
Yeah, so a couple of things to remember about winter sowing when you're working with winter sowing. A few extras that you can do. Some folks like to add grit or vermiculite to the top of their pots when they're doing any kind of vernalization work. This particular gritty mix, this is by Soul Soils, and they're a Minnesota local company. Shout out to those guys because we love them here at Gertens. And this is their bonsai gritty mix, and this is a fantastic grit to use on the top of your pots when you are using when you're using very fine seeds. So if I were to sow some poppy seed or other teeny tiny little seeds, I might put a little bit of grit, just sprinkle it on the top of the pot, and that helps to keep the seeds where I put them. It helps to keep them protected. The little bit of rock is actually going to help with the vernalization process because it's going to kind of take some of the heat and the cold processes, and it's going to amplify that a little bit with all of the thermal dynamics that go on when you add rock to anything. So gritty mix is a great idea for using really fine, or anybody who feels more comfortable having a slight topper on their seeds. Having rock on the top, just a little bit, just a tiny bit, you don't want to add a lot, but having a little bit of grit can also help to keep some of the bug issues down. Indoors, we use it for getting rid of fungus gnats because they don't like to lay their eggs in rocky surfaces, but it can also help with some of the other soft-bodied pests. Now, in the spring, when you do get warmer days, when you're starting to get 55-degree days, you can go out and you can take your humidity dome off your seedlings and you can expose them to the warm air. That also exposes them to some flying insects, crawling insects and things. And using a little bit of grit when you've got, big pansies and poppies here, and you've got little tiny milkweeds over here, that can kind of help to protect some of the younger, tinier plants from some of the damage that those insects could cause in earlier spring times.
Perfect.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic winter, and I hope to see you here at Gertens. Come and visit me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, whether it is about seeds, bulbs, any of the fountains, pottery stuff, roses. Come and see me about roses. I know all of you have questions about roses. I hear from you all the time. We are so appreciative of each and every one of you, and we look forward to seeing you in 2022. Thank you so much for joining us today, everybody.